Okay, wow. I'm really excited that you all are here so that we can have a discussion about The Maid. This is a TV series, and wow. I watched the whole thing and then I thought it was important to have a discussion about the different themes that appear in the show. And I understand that they just scratch the surface and they don't go really in depth, but I do think that it highlights the issues that we face within our community. So I decided to contact all of these women that you see here and see if they wanted to be involved, and they said yes. So here we are. My name is Rose Larson. My sign name is R near the nose. I have long blonde hair and a black shirt with rainbow earrings and a gray wall behind me. I'm a queer, white, deaf woman, and I work with Deaf World Against Violence Everywhere, which is in Ohio. And now I'll turn it over to Roberta.
Hi everyone, my name is Roberta. My name sign is an R on the back of my hand. I'm wearing a white shirt that says as strong as the women next to me. Just like all of you. I have black hair and a green background. Off to the right to me is a portrait of a blue image. I'm a black deaf woman. I work for Deaf Dawn as a survivor resource specialist in Washington, D.C., serving Maryland and Virginia as well in domestic violence. Now off to you, Jasmine.
Yes, hello, my name is Jasmine, a J on the chin. I am from Texas, and I am an advocate with Deaf Safe. I have a white background with a wooden desk and a keyboard and a computer on my left. I have long, dangly yellow earrings, blonde hair, glasses, a white shirt with a black suit jacket, and I am a Puerto Rican woman who is also deaf. And now I will turn it over to DeAnna.
Hi, everyone. I am a black deaf woman with a black head wrap on, and I've got nice big hoops on, and I have a long green shirt on, and I've got a pink background behind me. I work as a program director for Bridges, and now I'll pass it over to you, Aracelia.
Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Aracelia, and my visual description is I am wearing a maroon, dark, long sleeve shirt. My hair is curly and pulled back. I have a black background behind me, and I'm sitting with a light shining on my face. I am a Latina woman, and I work for Deaf Hope as a empowerment director, and I also provide direct services with survivors.
Yeah. So, when Rose reached out to me and asked if I wanted to be a part of this panel in regards to the TV show The Maid, I looked it up on Netflix. And I have to say, all of my friends were saying how fantastic it was. I binged this show. And, I watched it as me, as Roberta, but at the same time, I couldn't help but view it in the eyes of an advocate, as an individual providing services to deaf survivors, thinking about how the system works. And also considering what was reality and what was a part of the TV show. Now, I think this is a great opportunity for the community to get together and for us all from different states, representing Ohio in the Midwest, DeAnna in the South, Aracelia in California out west, and Jasmine in Texas, for us all really to get together. Because I want you all to understand that we don't have the same system. Every state has a different system. And so it's a nice opportunity for all of us to get together and share the variety of perspectives that we have. So, I binged The Maid in 3 days. It was emotionally exhausting. So I'm curious, ladies, what scene in this show really, really shocked you? What got to you?
Oh, there were many of them. This is Jasmine. The couch part was really impactful. It explained itself without any words. When I watched it, it really impacted me.
If I could. This is Rose. I agree with you, Jasmine. The couch scene was indeed very impactful. You know, as a survivor myself, you know, when you have that feeling of being in that black abyss, you're separated from everyone, you're hopeless. That's what happens in that scene with Alex. You see her descent into this black hole, and that really just depicts what other survivors are experiencing and what they go through. I think it also is a great correlation to depression and what that feels like as well.
And I would like to mention that, you know, when survivors get to that point where they feel like they're sinking, we have to look at what's happened leading up to that point. You know, them being told, no, we can't from the system. Those are the things that contribute and lead them to that point. And so as community members, we have to realize our own value and what we can contribute. So, you know, just offering to chat with that person, it seems really simple, but it could really help them a lot.
Yeah, if I could. Well, here, I'll go ahead and talk. This is Roberta. And, you know, we'll see if DeAnna and I are on the same wavelength or not. I think that moment where you see Alex in that black abyss is very powerful, because you'll see people who seem like everything is just going fine. But on the inside, they're emotionally, physically, mentally, they're just struggling to get by. And the system is oppressing them. They're putting barriers up. Now think about somebody with a differing identity, somebody who's deaf, who's in that situation. Someone who's not in an abusive relationship might look in on a relationship like that and blame the victim and not realize that different perspective. All right, go ahead, DeAnna. What were you going to say?
Yeah, what really impacted me was how her mind was playing tricks on her. You know, she was trying to figure out if it were other people's thoughts or if it were her own thoughts, and really becoming obsessed with what people may or may not be thinking about her. And just allowing those words to really take over her mind and believe in those false truths. And for us who are deaf, sometimes it's reading somebody's body language, but really that person doesn't mean anything. They don't actually care at all. It's just their personality, you know, just who they are. But how we read it, we make all of these assumptions about what they may or may not be thinking about us. And that might feel like we can't trust that person. We might feel resistant to their help or how they're trying to be involved. And so I really can see it from both perspectives.
This is Jasmine. You know, I was thinking about the scene where they talked about what is violence and what is not violence, which leads me to my next question. What kind of violence did you see in this series? This is Rose. A lot.
This is DeAnna. Financial abuse. It's really powerful to actually see the money in her account continuously decreasing. You know, I have to get gas, I have to get food, and then just seeing that balance continually decreasing. And she was dependent upon Sean for 2 years because of that. And so making that decision to be persistent, even though financially she wasn't able to support herself. And so it was very clear. It was right there. This is Aracelia. And so even though the violence that they were seeing was not physical violence, it was still violence. And what it was isolation. And that was really impactful. You know, she decides to leave. She's struggling. And in that moment, she needs a place for her and her daughter to stay. And so Sean invites them over to stay. And she wakes up the next morning and her safety net is gone. That is so impactful. And that shows the intentional isolation and control. And it shows the cycle of violence. We know it takes survivors 7 times to leave. And so this is the second cycle that we're seeing in the show. That's just so impactful.
This is Rose, and I just wanted to respond to Aracelia's comment when thinking about isolation. I remember that scene where she was in the woods, and this was her second time she was trying to leave, and she was engulfed and overwhelmed by the woods itself. That it showed the isolation. She had no car. She had no way to get out of there. Sean had degraded her mother and had tried to get rid of all of the people that were in her life. And that's what abusers do. They make you get to a point where you are left, where it's just you alone. This is Roberta speaking. You know, when I put on my advocacy hat, and I think of all of the different dynamics in this movie, Sean, the isolation, Alex, and their daughter Maddie, I will say that in that episode, or throughout the episodes, one could say, Maddie experienced abuse as well, just by witnessing items being thrown at her mother. And that in itself is childhood abuse, and that will impact Maddie in the future.
Yes, this is Jasmine. I want to add around, hearing children hear parents screaming, that's verbal abuse. And we have to recognize that those same parallels exist in the deaf community in recognizing body language.
And this is Rose. Jasmine is making a point about verbal aggression and how that correlates back to how one behaves physically and intimidates one another. Now, I will say that there is a difference between how one acts when they're upset, and they do have a right to do that, versus becoming physically intimidating and taking up space and signing aggressively. And that then causes intimidation to the person who's witnessing that communication. And that person may feel unsafe. And we know that that's a difference between how one would typically communicate and what deaf culture typically looks like. And so we have to make sure that there is an understanding of how those approaches differ.
This is Roberta speaking. Oh, I beat you, DeAnna. Let's see if we're thinking the same thing. So Rose's comment leads me to bring up the power and control wheel, the deaf power and control wheel. There are many different cultural models of power and control wheels, and we have our own in the deaf community, and it was designed by Aracelia's agency, Deaf Hope. So the power and control wheel is designed using survivors' different experiences and how they had to navigate the system. So the agency did interviews and used those experiences to create the power and control wheel. So again, emotional abuse is there, and knowing what is healthy and what is unhealthy. So again, when folks are signing, knowing that they need to have that appropriate sign space to be able to communicate and not towering over one another to show intimidation. Also knowing that there are healthy ways and unhealthy ways to get somebody's attention. Getting someone's attention should never physically hurt. And these are things that might be overlooked altogether, but the survivor themselves know that it's a tactic. The abuser may threaten to report them to Social Security so that their income is taken away. They may pound on things to get someone's attention and then just be like, oh, I was just trying to get their attention. That's it.
And this is DeAnna. So, but you know what? I'll hold off on my comment and I'll pass the mic over to Aracelia.
Yeah, I just want to mention that oftentimes verbal abuse is very covert. It's something that we may not notice. And I saw this often in the episodes. For example, when Alex's mom was babysitting the daughter and Alex went off to clean, her phone didn't have any reception. Her mom didn't know what to do. So she sent Maddie back to be with her dad, with Sean. And, she was saying, oh, don't worry. Sean was saying, don't worry. Maddie's asleep. I made you some food. Sit down and eat. And Alex was feeling skeptical about this whole situation, and Sean was saying, "Oh, but don't hurt my feelings." So that was one example. And then also, when Alex was trying to find Sean at the bar and wonder where her daughter was, and her daughter was home with her grandma, but she didn't know that. And so the way that he acted in front of his friends toward her, that was just really terrible. And the way that somebody is being put down, that is emotional abuse. And oftentimes, again, that is overlooked by people, but really it is serious.
This is Jasmine. The last thing I would add was just to kind of take a look at the words being used. Words are harmful. They do have an impact on people, and that trauma can just quadruple. But DeAnna, off to you. This is DeAnna. I want to circle back to Roberta's question. And yes, maybe Sean didn't actually physically assault Alex, but emotional violence is still domestic violence, and it's often overlooked within the deaf community. So when we think about what is abuse, what is that red flag between Alex and Sean, the thing that I noticed, hold on. You know what? Let me talk about the deaf community first. The deaf community tends to be blunt. We're culturally blunt in how we communicate. We're not afraid to tell someone to shut up. So when we go back to this situation with Alex and Sean, we had a scenario within the series where Alex talked about wanting to be financially independent and working, but Sean belittled her and encouraged her to work on the weekends, even though there was no work during the week. That was the compromise that was set in place. He minimalized her needs and trapped her within that cycle of isolation. Yes, some of us who are deaf can be blunt. We can cut other people down, but that's not a healthy relationship. And I would also say that we tend to cross that line, that boundary, when it comes to our comments. We go outside of our lane. Now, another example I'd like to portray is Alex's father when they were at dinner. He didn't say a single word when he saw that abuse. We see that within the deaf community too. We will witness a terrible incident, some erroneous comments, and we say, hey, it's not my problem. It's not my problem. It's very similar to what Alex's father did. Who am I? That's a red flag. We are allowing someone to be abusive. That child is experiencing that abuse. And that leads to generational abuse because the mother was a victim of that as well. And so for Alex's father, this was behavior that was normalized to him. So technically, he should know better. He should be stepping up when that aggression was seen. So it comes back to that boundary between blunt and between tearing someone down. Come on, we can be tactful. When it comes to certain situations, we can learn to be tactful.
Yes, this is Rose here. So related to that part where the father is there for dinner, when Sean told Alex to sit down, the way that he said it, the tone, that is such a great example of intimidation. That is mental and verbal abuse. The way you tell someone to do something. The implicit message there is, or I'll do something. So I think that that's such a great example of intimidation. Yes, I agree. This is Roberta. I think about that scene with the social worker and she asking if Alex reported it to the police. And Alex's response is, well, he didn't hit me. And she is right. Sean didn't hit her, but there were clear examples of emotional abuse. And in real life, police typically are only called if physical violence is evident because they're looking for that, and that's what they consider domestic violence. And then it would be documented in a police report. The survivor would then go to court. But with Alex, she felt stuck because she didn't have any proof. There was no physical violence, and there's no way to document the emotional violence. And oftentimes in shelters, when survivors show up, those are the first questions that they're asking, is about physical violence. So yes, abuse happened, but then the survivor doesn't meet the criteria for the system.
This is Jasmine. You know, Roberta, you're right. When we have individuals call the hotline, one of the first questions they ask is if they've been physically assaulted. But you know, there's a lot more to abuse than just that. There's emotional, there's mental, there's financial. But you know, I think about that scene where Sean gets up in Alex's faces. We know that the next thing that's going to happen is he's going to grab her by the neck. We know that everything leads to a future kind of abuse that's just going to get aggressively worse. And you know, it makes me think of this concept of invisible abuse. We don't want to minimize physical abuse, but we need to pay attention to that invisible abuse as well.
This is Rose here. I want to add to Jasmine's comment. So when we think about shelter, oftentimes shelters are designed for intimate partner violence, and that's how their system operates. And so we have to think about people who maybe don't meet that criteria. So for example, members of the deaf community often experience violence at the hands of family or friends, and that does not fit the definition of intimate partner violence. And so that's really important for us to keep that in mind.
This is Roberta. You're right. The resources, there are not as many resources within the deaf community as you would think. And to be honest, across the U.S., roughly there are about 25 domestic violence, sexual violence programs. And they don't provide in-depth services. 25! However, when you compare that to the hearing community, they have 3,000, thousands and thousands of programs. And there are some states that don't have a single program at all, like Alabama, Montana. Let's see here. What's another one? I know we have one. Florida. Florida is another example. So I know we get a lot of calls from Florida. Pennsylvania doesn't have one. So if you're thinking about a survivor that lives in one of those states that I just mentioned, things get tough. This is Aracelia. I also wanted to mention, in regards to relationships and domestic violence, the person that causes harm will also blame the survivor and they'll feign innocence. And if you look at Sean's actions, for example, you see that he's not worried about her taking his kid and saying that she doesn't have money. And when it comes down to it, he uses the courts as a weapon to intimidate and oppress her. And so in that moment where we see Alex in the courtroom, all she hears is legal, 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 legal. She doesn't understand a single word. Now, that's not something that just happens to deaf people. That happens to anyone. The language that is used in the court system is very complicated. And so that I felt that very deeply. You know, as an advocate, I go into those situations. I see how people use the court system to harm another person and oppress them. You know, they do that to the mothers as well.
This is Jasmine. I want to comment on the part where the social worker asks Alex for pay stubs, you know? She just left home. What a question to ask, you know? She doesn't ask, are you safe? I think that there's a way to change this approach. Are you okay? Are you safe? What do you need now? As opposed to just going through this laundry list of questions. You know, are you an addict? Do you use drugs and alcohol? Alex is already traumatized and upset, and she has to show up here for a reason. I don't know. That scene just really bothered me.
This is Rose. Another perspective to that scene where Jasmine was just talking about. I mean, it truly shows the reality of how desperate the system is. Social workers are overworked. Advocates overworked. They need more people. And the system doesn't really value those kind of services or those kind of people in those roles. So it's just something to keep in mind, food for thought.
Yeah, I agree. This is Jasmine. Social workers are overworked and underpaid, and so those important support roles are just not valued in our systems. Yes, this is DeAnna. And I just want to comment that her support system is trying to give her a guilt trip. They say to her, it'll just make your life easier. Just go back home. Sean takes care of you. He does this and that. But Alex's response is that she doesn't want to. She's trying to find herself. And also, Sean thinks that he has a right to do whatever he wants, and he doesn't. And sure, he didn't hit Alex, but again, all of the emotional abuse. And the response from her family is, but he takes care of you. And that's a red flag, dismissing this abuse. Family supporting the abuser and dismissing the survivor. That is really traumatizing. Also, the grandparents never take into consideration the effect that this has on their granddaughter. Alex makes a decision to take her daughter in the middle of the night, all for the sake of making sure that her daughter is good and safe. So that is a red flag when you don't get the support from the systems that you thought you would. And also her friends, they are very dismissive as well. Like, oh, well. And that's just really sad to me.
This is Roberta. In response to DeAnna's comment, I think it's important to keep in mind that the mom and Axel aren't in a healthy relationship either. And so I don't think the mom would have been able to identify the difference between right and wrong because she can't even identify it in her own relationship. And so you can't expect any support for Alex in that situation.
So this is Jasmine, and I think that this leads us to a conversation about Nate. So Aracelia, do you want to go ahead and ask your question? Yeah, now I would like to talk about Nate. Was Nate wrong for pursuing Alex? And what kind of harm did Nate cause in this situation?
Whew. This Roberta. I already said that. You know what? I'll let you go.
It was obvious that Nate really liked Alex, but he also knew what had happened with Sean. And so, yes, he wanted to make sure that Alex was good, but Alex gave him a very clear boundary. She had a conversation with him, and she let him know that she was not ready or in a position to be in a relationship with him. So she was very clear about that. And so that's where, when we think about Nate's expectations, and how she went and stayed with Sean that night and then he got mad, Alex had already clearly communicated with him. And so I felt like it was his choice on how he continued with her. What are your all's thoughts?
This is Roberta. So, all right, I watched this show and I had this personal reaction where all I could think was, Alex, come on, girl. Give Nate a shot. He seems so nice, especially in comparison to Sean. But then again, I had to tell myself, girl, you got to stop. You got to think of things with your advocate's hat on. This is a red flag. Girl, stop. I was really bummed, but at the same time, Nate really crossed that boundary line. Alex had that in place, I understand he gave her a car. And he gave her a place to stay. Yes, childcare as well, Aracelia. And as all of these things he started to give her, I knew that something was just going to go wrong. And when he told her to get out and started to body shame her, I knew that all of those previous actions, they made sense. It was love bombing.
Yes, it was that.
And you give. And it's not organic. It's not organic love. It was to the nth level. And that in itself was a red flag.
Yeah, this is Rose. I really support what Roberta was saying about love bombing. And for me, this was a huge red flag. And I have seen this often when, somebody tries to pursue somebody who's just gotten out of a relationship and it's just like too much. It's constantly being positive, it's constantly giving, and there's always an exchange or an expectation. And again, when you really care about a person, when you really love a person, you give without expectation. You understand their situation and you're willing to back off when necessary. But when that person isn't willing to do that, then there's some type of hidden agenda or expectation. You know, Alex said, I'm in a bad position right now. And so she had a vision of what a healthy relationship would look like. And so I want to back up a little bit. Oftentimes, when survivors get out of one bad relationship, they jump into another unhealthy relationship. Now, maybe that relationship is better than the relationship they left previously, but it's still not healthy, and that person may ultimately end up being an abuser.
This is Jasmine. Of course, I felt very similarly to all of you are saying. All I could think was, come on, Nate's helping you find a way out. He's giving you a place to stay, a car. You're living with him. And then I realized, as an advocate, if I'm promoting that, I'm not respecting what the survivor is feeling. She wants to be successful. She wants to go to college. She has plans in mind. And we need to realize that the process that took place here with Nate was a red flag. She said that she wasn't ready. She was very clear in her feelings. And yet the expectations were still there. And then, end of the day, he slut-shamed her. So I had to put an X-nay on Nate. Yep, he was no longer an option for me.
This is DeAnna. I felt the same. I was like, girl, go on. Go get him. He is your Prince Charming. What are you complaining about? But then I had to stop and I had to say, DeAnna, shut up. Watch the rest of it. And then I'm like, nope, Alex did make the right decision. He was damn desperate. He needed to just calm down. Really, the foundation for any good relationship is being friends first. Friendship communicates respect and follows boundaries. And if he would have done that by being friends and not pushing for more, checking in, are you okay? Do you need anything? And when she says no, respect that and just step back. But instead, he was constantly giving, making Alex feel like a charity case and like she should move forward with this relationship. And she's like, no, I'm homeless. I don't have this. I don't have that. And Nate is constantly minimizing her experience, saying, I'll take care of you. And again, he's ripping away her independence. And so in Alex's mind, now I'm jumping into another relationship that I'm not ready for. I'm trying to work hard to build up a life for my daughter and I, and you're just tearing it down. Alex emphasized she just wanted to be friends. And Nate kept saying, just give it time. Like, come on, it'll be fine. And really, Nate just needed to chill. And even Sean was able to recognize and communicate to Alex that Nate was feeling more than friendship. But Alex was in denial. And this is a place where Nate obviously became jealous. And he was saying, you're willing to give him a chance, but you're not willing to give me a chance. But what needed to be understood is that Alex and Sean were not getting back together. Just because they hooked up doesn't mean that they were back together. This is a moment where emotions were very high with Alex's mom. And it was really, she made an impulsive decision to go back to a place where she found comfort during this emotional time. And so, sure, Nate was nice, but he was not right for her.
This is Aracelia. I just want to add on to DeAnna's comment. We, as people in that supporting role, we want to help our survivor. So, for example, we saw Nate and we're like, come on, we were cheering for her to just move in with him. But we have to remember what the survivor wants in this situation. Does she want to depend on this person? She just got out of a relationship where she was depending on Sean. So, going into even a relationship that was a friendship, she's depending on another individual. And so we have to think about it in these different perspectives. So yes, we want the best for that individual, but what we may want may actually be harmful for them, and it is their experience after all. This is Jasmine. One thing that I noticed throughout the series was Nate's intention to try to make her feel comfortable. Try to get her out of this experience or feeling that she was having, rip off the Band-Aid, but that's not healing. I feel like if we were to think about Nate's character, he kicked her out at the end. And if he hadn't done that, I think they would have been friends. And I would have been more accepting of who Nate is. But he becomes that abuser later on, an abuser in an invisible manner. And I feel like if he would have handled things differently, had been his friend, who knows what would have happened later on. But he had his own agenda. He was rushing through this traumatic experience that she was having and didn't respect her boundaries.
This is Rose. I want to make a point here, and I want to make it a very important point. When a person sleeps with someone, it does not mean that they are together. Oftentimes in society, they will look down on women who sleep with a person, or even one or two people, and they'll label them as a slut. Alex is not a slut for sleeping with Sean and Nate. But when we think about the reverse situation with men, typically society will just brush that off. But when it comes to women, they'll come up with all of these different names, slut and shaming and all these things. And as women, we are allowed to have pleasure. We have needs. If we want to sleep with someone without any commitment, that's perfectly acceptable. And so I think that that's just worth a consideration.
This is Roberta. I think there's a difference between a pleasurable one-night stand and being back in a relationship. Alex does have that one-night stand, and the deaf community, well, actually, just in general, people will start to have this conversation of, well, why did you go back? But at the same time, there is this relationship, this emotional connection, the fact that you have children together, all of that is already in place. So you can't really blame Alex. Was it wrong for her to have this one-night stand? No, it is what it is.
Yes, this is Rose again. So just commenting on your comment, Roberta, you're right. Like, people go back to what's comfortable, to what they know. Survivors always know what is best for them. And so sometimes to us, from an outside perspective, it may not seem like a good decision, but we have to remember that survivors know what is best for them. And it's not our job to judge them because we're not them. This is Roberta. Yeah, it's normal for survivors to go back to their relationships and then to leave again. And different people have different situations, and it's fine. And what's most important for us is to remember that it's not our job to judge them. Victims may feel paralyzed by the system, and they may go back to that abuser for help. And we have to remember that with abusers, their ultimate goal is to isolate survivors. So we have to remember not to let the abuser win. And we have to be there waiting to support that survivor with whatever situation comes up. It's fine if the survivor goes back and hooks up. When they're ultimately ready to leave, we're there as a support system, ready to know. At the very end where Nate gives her the car, we know, and he knows, oh shit, she's going back. But anyway, we just go on with the situation, and it's a gift, and she says thank you. Yeah, this is Rose here. So this really leads me to my next question. What barriers do you see in this series? I know that we've already mentioned about survivors tend to go back to their abusers. And I know it was mentioned that it typically takes 7 times, but really for deaf blind, and deaf disabled populations, the statistic is 2 and 3 times that. So we know it takes deaf people even longer. So what barriers do you see for survivors, or specifically for Alex?
This is Jasmine. Housing. Alex and her daughter are being pushed from place to place consistently. She'll find housing, but then it had mold, and then she had to go live with her father. So consistently, her and her daughter are moving from place to place. So housing was definitely very difficult. And in that situation, the system failed her.
This is DeAnna. Another barrier that I noticed is that you have to pay for daycare. Her job doesn't provide that. Mm-hmm. And also her job, she had to pay for her uniform. She had to pay for her cleaning supplies. She had to pay for her mop. And so all these extra expenses that she wasn't planning to incur. And then she shows up at the house. There's no answer. So now she's lost money. And then she cleans for the client, but the client isn't satisfied with her job. And she said, oh no, I'm not satisfied. You did a lousy job. And so then Alex doesn't get paid. And that is a huge barrier. When you are being paid to do a job for just such a small amount of money, but it takes so much time, it doesn't equate to the money that you have to pay for daycare. So then Alex has to ask them if they're willing to let her pay later, but then they're not willing to continue to provide daycare. So then what is Alex supposed to do? She may be able to get assistance to help pay for daycare, but they're not going to give her the full amount of assistance, and so she still has this cost that she's incurring.
This is Aracelia. Wow. When Alex is off at work, her phone is a vital lifeline to being able to make sure she's safe and everyone in her family is safe. When I think about our deaf survivors, that phone is so important. It's access to communication. It is one of the biggest barriers sometimes people can face, especially when it's gone. And when Alex's phone is gone, she experiences additional anxiety and feels traumatized just by that experience. So if you think about when she's working over on Fisher Island, where she's trying to work, she is wanting to get her daughter into daycare over there, but the school requires proof of residency. That is another barrier that Alex experiences. She's trying to give her daughter a better life, but barriers are popping up to and fro. So I just think of those 2 additional moments because really the main goal for Alex is just to provide safety for herself and her child.
This is Rose commenting. I want to add to Aracelia's comment. You're right. Her cell phone is her lifeline. And so also think about the fact that Alex is able to speak and use verbal communication. So think about deaf folks who aren't able to do that. Think about the barriers of childcare, employment, getting government assistance. You have to jump through hoop after hoop. And so then think about the way that deaf people try to navigate these systems, and it really shows an increase in barriers. And, when we go back to that question about why survivors go back, This is such a good example because there are so many barriers. No family support, no friend support. Some deaf survivors literally have no one who can help with childcare, nothing. And they really do feel stuck, especially when you think about increased isolation, like, for example, deaf-blind individuals. Here in Ohio, there is no federal funding or state funding to pay for SSPs. And so deaf-blind individuals have to negotiate those services themselves. And so if they don't have an SSP, then what do they do? So, I mean, the barriers are definitely real.
This is DeAnna. I really think of the parallels between the deaf community and the hearing community. When it comes to just picking a school for your child, it's very limited. You have the choice of a state school and a mainstream school. That's it. And then I think about daycare and how that comes into play. When you have a parent-teacher conference, are you going to bring in an interpreter? There's always an additional barrier for an individual that's deaf. And so if we think about those and how that impacts the deaf community, as well as Alex's situation, we always find ourselves truly pondering what we're doing as deaf, domestic violence, sexual assault advocates, and how those two things are interconnected, and the outlook on others just looking in on our personal experience. With Alex, my question is, with that experience that she had, how does that parallel back to our deaf experience? What barriers would we have in that situation?
Yes, this is Roberta, and absolutely, deaf people do experience barriers. For example, in shelters, oftentimes shelters are set up for hearing people in hearing environments, and deaf people are often isolated. For example, Alex is able to find support from Danielle in the shelter. There's a peer support group there. And I mean, it's a large peer support group. But those are all hearing people. And so oftentimes when deaf people go into shelter, they don't have anyone who they can see that their experience parallels with someone else's. And so oftentimes deaf people will go back to their abusive situations because communication is a priority for deaf people. And so they will suffer through this abusive relationship at the expense of having communication. And also we have to consider that Alex is a white woman. And I am not by any means saying that her experience is not valid. Oh, her experience is absolutely valid, yes. But again, when we think about the barriers that white survivors face compared to BIPOC survivors, trans survivors, LGBTQ survivors, those barriers are even greater. So oftentimes when I work with other BIPOC survivors, I'm trying to convince them to trust these systems that they have to interact with, when oftentimes they want to approach it differently. And so oftentimes within our community, we will just take care of each other and solve those problems within our own community. And so I often recognize that.
This is Rose. I agree with you, Roberta. That experience for an individual who is BIPOC is insurmountable. And not only for them, but individuals with a variety of different identities. It makes me think about mental health resources as well as drug and alcohol. Within the deaf community, those resources are minute. A lot of people try to segregate domestic violence, sexual assault away from substance use. But really, if you think about it, those are both interwoven topics. A lot of survivors may have either experienced mental health or haven't experienced it, and it was initiated by that domestic violence incident. And also, there are survivors that use drug and alcohol as their coping skills. So they're really all interconnected. And if we resolve the domestic violence and sexual assault, there's still that missing piece of mental health. So it's truly a catch-22, and that's the kind of things that I'm seeing in the community.
Yes, this is Jasmine. I also want to bring up another barrier around insurance. So when survivors finish our program and they're exiting, oftentimes they want to continue with counseling. But if those counselors don't accept Medicare and Medicaid, then that is a huge barrier. They want to continue their healing journey. So it means they have to start their healing journey over again. Oftentimes they give up on the system, go back to where they were before, or they just give up on life. They're really over that struggle. And so I do think that that is a huge barrier to address.
This is Roberta. In regards to mental health, I will say throughout the series, we're following Alex. And Alex is the main character. We're seeing her experience trying to get help, but then we also get to see her mother. And, her mother is in her own way trying to support Alex, but she also has undiagnosed bipolar. And we get to a point in the show where Alex realizes that she's going to have to put her mom in a psychiatric ward. And the question that's left is Alex responsible for her mother?
This is Rose. No. Alex's mother is an adult, and people are responsible for themselves. What Alex and her mother have are an unhealthy relationship. They're very codependent on each other. And that's why the cycle with the two of them continues to happen. And oftentimes people in relationships become codependent on each other, and it creates an unhealthy dynamic. When Alex puts her mom into the hospital, and then at the end, when it's time for Alex to go off to college, she really wants her mom to go with her, but her mom says no, that she needs to stay. And Alex realizes that she needs to let her mother go. And it seems that her mother may have realized that same thing, that it was time to let Alex go. And that was really touching.
Yeah. This is Jasmine. I also want to make sure that it's understood that there are some cultures that believe that one has to take care of their parents. And, at this point, Alex is thinking about not only taking care of her mom, but her daughter and the things that her daughter is seeing. And so it's that time to cut the cord, which is emotionally very difficult, but it was definitely time for Alex to go off on her own. And I think her mom saw that as well. It's a very touching scene. This is Roberta. I also think about the beginning of the show, there's this other impactful moment. We know that her mother has a lot of mental health issues. And we get to a point in the series where she has a manic episode. Axel's taken her house. He's not paid the bills. And he runs off. And mom goes back to the house. She breaks through the window and she hurts her hand. And I have this moment where I had chills. She had hit that point where the only option was to take her to the hospital. And the attendants at the hospital ask Alex if she's willing to take responsibility for her mother. Oh my gosh, that moment, I was feeling it deep.
This is Aracelia, and it made me wonder if the mom knew she was experiencing domestic violence. She was always out, there was a lot going on, and it really made me feel for her. It wasn't clear whether she understood that or not.
This is DeAnna. Thinking about Aracelia's comment in regards to the mom, whether she understood she was in a domestic violence relationship, it makes me think of that moment where Alex brings up, hey, mom, why didn't you tell me that dad used to hit you? And she goes into this fit about, why keep bringing up the past? Stop. Let's move on into the future. But she's really not laying a foundation for Alex to be able to learn how to deal with these situations. And it takes her a really long time for her to realign her thoughts and understand that mom was a victim too, but mom's too busy trying to change the topic. the truth is she's a victim, but she's trying to protect the abuser. And as soon as somebody says something negative about the abuser, she starts changing the tune. She's like, oh, he's such a good person. Come on, let's think about the positives. But that in itself is harm. You don't validate the abuser in front of the survivor. That in itself is degrading. You are causing harm. And so that's something that we need to think about in our work. We have to stop and consider the behavior and what harm it caused and the harm it causes children. And learning that's a journey. And sometimes you just got to be on the journey and validate and support the individual as they walk along their path and make their own decisions in life.
This is Jasmine. I want to comment on that. So how Alex finds out that her mother is a victim is when she goes to her father's house and she's standing in the kitchen. She sees the cabinet and she has a flashback. Oftentimes, trauma doesn't pop back up until later. When something happens, we store those memories, and then often we'll wonder, why is this coming up now after 20 years? And so it's those triggers. When you see something, it brings back that memory. And that is really powerful because Alex's mom never told her she was a victim. Alex found out herself.
This is Rose. I'd like to offer another perspective. That ability to disassociate and continue on with your life is a coping skill that some survivors do have. They forget past experiences and disassociate from that, and that's not a bad thing because it helps them to survive and move along with their lives. And it seems like a mechanism that is effective for Alex in this situation. We all have these coping mechanisms that we use, but it's important to recognize that that's what they are. Now, Alex's mother, she experienced several different encounters with domestic violence throughout her life, and her survivor experience is to be in a relationship and then break up, and that cycle continues. That also correlates back with substance abuse and mental health and having those appropriate means of support in one's life to be able to acknowledge what that is and then move through it. And so that's an additional barrier that a survivor may experience. Yeah.
This is Roberta. And so I was thinking here of the last question as we wrap up today. And I was thinking about Aracelia and her work around working with the folks who cause harm. And so typically as advocates, we focus on working with the survivor and supporting them. And historically, that has been a very common approach to working in the domestic violence field, is that we only focus on the survivor. But later we realized that if we actually want to stop the cycle of domestic violence while also supporting the survivor, we have to give focus to those who cause harm. So Aracelia, could you talk about that?
This is Aracelia. Yes, often we will see survivors who are indeed victims, but they really love their partners. And that's where we try to get in and resolve things, because we know how the system will cause overlapping trauma and additional harm that bleeds back into that survivor's life. And so we want to recognize that it's not the most effective way for someone to heal. And we really want to consider what that individual's end goal is and what their hope is, so that we can work with that individual that caused harm. And if you think back into the show, with the character Sean, he starts to have this realization about the experiences with his own mother and the harm that she caused, and dealing with his own trauma and pain. And so that's where we might try to get involved and really focus on that topic and give space for Sean to address those traumatic experiences, accept accountability for the harm that he caused. People who, when people are born, they are not born to cause harm. Something has happened to them, and they've thus experienced that harm, and that's where they learned it from. There is always a starting point, and so we try to address those past experiences and then work on what those needs may be and find individuals who can become a supportive force in that individual's life, like in Sean's life. And so you remember with Sean, there was always someone who was continually reaching out and asking if he was going to meetings. And I think in the end, we return that individual back to the community a more healthy participant with tools, and that really helps us in that continual behavior, because harm is all they know. That's all they've experienced. They don't have a healthy way to repair or deal with conflicts when they take place. And so I think about RJ and TJ and how that affects individuals. What was that? Transformative justice and restorative justice. Those are community-based approaches, and how we get those different aspects involved in the community, not going straight to the police, but being a community-based approach.
And I also want to comment that restorative justice and transformative justice is typically used by Black, Indigenous, and Latinx communities. And this has been used for many years, this approach. It's this approach versus this idea of like, don't you touch me. Like, you feel what I'm saying there? And so now white people have come in and commandeered these approaches, and we as BIPOC communities are like, wait, hold on a moment. And also it's important to emphasize, we are not marriage counselors. We are not relationship counselors. Our goal is not to get these two people back together in a relationship. That is not the approach here at all. The point is to address the actions that caused harm and to figure out how it is that we stop those actions. So it's a harm reduction approach is what it is. And also, I would also like to mention, lastly here, that this process itself is not a quick process. This process, I don't know, Aracelia, what would you say, 9 months? Yeah, I would say 9 months to a year for sure. So there's a lot of going back and forth with the survivor, going back and forth with the person who themselves caused harm. And we also have to recognize that this person has to be willing to admit the harm that they caused. And if they're not, then the process can't move forward. So as advocates, there's a lot of going back and forth with each person before we could ever bring those two people together.
This is Jasmine. I think it's important for all of us to keep in mind that we all cause harm in one way or another, and to really take a look at our own actions and thoughts. And there are some people that can't identify that harm because of the trauma that they've experienced throughout their life, and so they try to just push that aside, but that's not okay. One has to accept responsibility.
Right, and this is Aracelia. We have to acknowledge that this is a way we do preventative work. Once somebody is involved in the justice system, it's too late. So restorative justice and transformative justice is about investing in the community and figuring out how to stop that harmful behavior before somebody enters into the system. So that's just something to consider. Yes, this is Rose. So do y'all have any tips or feedback that we can give to the community in order for them to become more involved in transformative justice or restorative justice? How do we shift that culture?
This is Aracelia. I think a lot of it has to go back to attitude. There are many times throughout society that people are quick to pass blame off to somebody else. We all know that we've all caused harm. And by taking a moment just to really express that and apologize and take ownership of it, it goes a long way. And a lot of people don't feel comfortable with those moments. And we have to get to a spot where we can have those uncomfortable conversations. I also think it goes back to the punishment system within the family. Do you spank your child? Or do you bring everyone to the table and have a conversation about what took place? It's those little ways that we can embody restorative justice. It's those two things. They're simple concepts that we can begin with.
This is Rose. That is so true. It absolutely starts with us. Yes. This is Roberta. Okay. Whew. There was so much to discuss. Episodes 1 through 10. There were a lot of perspectives, a lot of great conversations. I'm so glad we were able to come together and share our different thoughts and perspectives. And hopefully you all are ready for part 2. That'll be on November 4th. We are looking forward to it. Thank you everyone for joining. This is Jasmine. If you all feel like you have any questions or comments, feel free to contact us. We would be happy to dialogue with you. Yes, we'll see you all again on November 4th. Thanks so much.